Welcome to the Queer Spirit Podcast. We're your hosts, Nick Fenagoni
and Tanya Marco Viedo. Our Queer Spirit Podcast spotlights queer artists, healers, practitioners, activists, and beings
who share their work and magic with our LGBTQIA, two-spirit, trans, and gender nonconforming communities and the collective. Today we have another cross-pollination episode for you with our friends over at the Radicle Curiosity podcast, Florez and Lynn Flanagan-Till. Florez, Awo Ifadunsin, is a diviner and metaphysical reader who facilitates spiritual connectivity and transformational empowerment throughout his myriad roles as a priest, lecturer, author, medicine maker, and activist. His work is inherently interdisciplinary and intersectional, bridging the fields of herbalism, ecology, divination, poetry, psychology, religious studies, gender and sexual studies, mixed media art, and perfumery. Lou investigates the emanating spirit present within all these fields and incorporates them into experiences that activate the spirit within.
Lynn Flanagan-Till is a mother, folk-futurist herbalist, generational Veštica, a skilled woman in Serb-Romani lineage, Olorisha, DIY ethnobotanist, botanical formulator, and nature punk. Her work is deeply influenced by ancestral traditions and rematriation. Lynn has been a practicing herbalist in the Denver area for over 20 years and is devoted to serving spirit and community via plants. In this collaboration, we have a roundtable conversation about herbs that we each feel a connection to the winter solstice. We share magic and history about rue, creosote, rosemary, and osha. We offer practices for each one you can do at home to deepen your relationship and understanding.
You can listen to Radicle Curiosity on your favorite podcast platform. That's RADICLE, Curiosity. You can find Lou at louflorez.com, and you can find Lynn at lynnflanagantill.com. Please find these links and more in the show notes.
Welcome, y'all. We're so grateful to be coming together today. And in doing so, we want to bring in the energy of grounding. So I invite each one of us to just take a moment to orient to our setting, where we are in this moment. And as we orient, I invite you to notice where your feet and or structure are making contact to the earth, with earth, Pachamama. And as we continue to notice and be present with our surrounding, we acknowledge earth as our grounding point for any time in our shared time today. Bringing us back, bringing us present, keeping us present. She'll also take anything that we release and she'll transmute it, recycle it, and transform it. Really honoring all the elements: earth, air, fire, water, ether, spirit. Inviting you to take a step deeper into grounding and connect to your breath. And if that happens to mean that your body wants to move a little bit as you connect to your breath, that's okay. Invite that in. Honoring our tools and guides and practices here on Pavanga land, Long Beach, California, honoring the land and the stewards of those lands. And this morning, I want to call in and sprinkle in the energies of Venus, the energies of the Hierophant as tarot energies of hearing, ancestral wisdom and teaching and knowledge as we explore and are curious about these beautiful plants and herbs that are here with us today. And I want to open it up for everyone else to sprinkle any type of grounding energies into our container today.
I'd like to just bring in the energies of the native lands where I am, the Ramaytush and the Ohlone, and the people who tended those lands to bring us the plants and the medicines that we'll be working with today.
I'd love to bring in, as we sit and connect and ground to the earth, to visualize from your sacrum, from your root chakra, a root going down through the chair, down through the foundation, spiraling down and being held.
I would love to ask all of our liberated ancestors within ourselves, all those who have tended medicines in their locations from time immemorial, all those who have really held community and held support and or just people to be counted on, that those liberated beings are awakened as we sit together in this conversation and as we continue to do our work in the world.
And naming on behalf of all of our communities and collective, climate change, climate crisis, all forms of genocide, harm, abuse, oppression, racism, naming and responding with spaces such as these, with support and care and compassion and understanding and forgiveness and grace. And then I just want to invite us all to take a nice, good inhale together and release through the mouth. Ooh, maybe a little shimmy shake. Because
Hey, shake, baby, shake.
That's right.
Shake your groove thing, shake your groove thing. Yeah, yeah.
That's right.
All right. Well, welcome everyone for being here with us today. We're here with Lou Florez and Lynn Till, Radicle Curiosity podcast for another cross-pollination with myself, Benegoni, and my collaborator, Tanya Mark Oviedo, the Queer Spirit podcast. So thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having us.
This is amazing. And it's also just great to be in community with folk who are talking about queer spirit, right? Like really engaging activism, engaging reflection, engaging ways of just being ourselves. And I think that kind of reflects also our personality in our podcast as well. So it's a great cross-pollinator.
So I thought we would start by just having us, since we're going to be sharing this on both of our episodes, we can just do a quick little round of introducing who we are to each other's audiences. So who would like to begin?
I'm Lynn Till from the Radicle Curiosity podcast. And so our podcast, our like tagline, our mission statement is about the relationship between people and plants in all the different ways. And me personally, I'm an herbalist. I call myself a folk-futurist herbalist for over 20 years professionally in the Denver area. I'm a mother of four. My pronouns are she, they. I'm very neuroqueer. And my connection to spirit, I feel strongest, is through water and plants since I was like a little and aware of it with memories. And that in a Balkan-Romani tradition, I'm a Veštica. And in Ifa ATR tradition, I'm an Iya initiated to Yamaya.
And as her partner on this podcast and dear friend, I'm Lou Florez. My name in the ATR tradition, my title is Awo, meaning high priest or, maid to the mystery. And my name is Ifadunsin, which is may Ifa be sweet to me. And curandero and work within Latin American brujeria and curanderismo traditions. My perspective on plants and kind of medicine making is a lot more through spirit work. And that's what I love about being in connection with amazing spirit workers and botanists is that they school me on the real, like how to help people biologically as well. So it's really beautiful being here. And I'm a big old queer, same gender loving, however you want to describe whoever I am and what I do. And that, also these identities are more than just what happens in the bedroom, right? That they're ways of engaging the world, seeing the connectivity, looking beyond the kind of the biological nastiness of this last couple of centuries. But anyway, that's me.
And I am Nick Fenagoni, co-host of the Queer Spirit podcast. And yeah, on our podcast, we have conversations and we like to have sort of cozy tea time and have a little bit of spiritual practice with artists, healers, activists, and other queer, spiritual, and witchy people around the world to bring inspiration to other queer folks on a spiritual path. And I am a therapist in private practice and here in San Francisco in the Bay Area. And I am excited to be here and talk about plants with you all today.
Hey y'all, I'm Tanya Marco Viado, they, them. I'm a very queer, non-binary, two-spirit witch, educator, mentor, curanderex. And I also am, I don't want to say like other half of queer spirit. It's like Nick and I are our queer spirit. And I am, really honored to be a part of not just the podcast. Nick and I also curate care circles for our queer community, and we host those monthly, and they're accessible and free, and it's where we can be in community and explore care practices. And I'm really grateful to be here with you all in this space. It just feels like home, if that makes sense. It just felt like coming home today. And I think that's always such a beautiful medicine to respond to. And I love poly pairing up with herbalists and botanists and other medicine people in all the ways, because I feel like it amplifies my call to work with medicine and spirit and magic. And I think when we come together, it just adds this kapow to our own practices and to the universe. So yeah, I just love coming together in community. So grateful to be here with y'all.
Hey, so that's all of us here today on this conversation. And wanted to talk about plants that we might have associations with to the winter solstice, and also plants that might have been connected to our bioregion, even if they're not native, but are happy in our bioregion where all of us are, because we're in a few different places. And so we're going to share some plants and some practices to do with those plants. And so, Lou, you're going to get us started off. So why don't you introduce us to your plant?
And, for folk, like, because we're kind of coming from different viewpoints and different ways of engaging community, that's the reason why we chose plants, right? But this can be a discussion about anything because all of us have a lot to say about everything, right? And I think that that's all going to be coming up in these discussions about plants. So it's not going to get boring, because I know that when we say plants, it can be a little bit like nerd out for folk who aren't in this specific community, but I promise, right? So the plant that I'm bringing to the table in Spanish is called cresote, or the cresote bush. In English, it's called the chaparral flower. The scientific name is Lirea tridentata, which I don't even know if I'm saying that right. So let's go with that, right? I first kind of just want to talk about its specialness to me, especially when we're talking about, right, like queer spirit, right? That it's not just a subject out there in the wild that like it does a thing, that there's actually a spirit that I'm engaging. And the first memory that I have of this plant is with my dear friend Ruta, who's this amazing Pacific Islands like midwife, spirit worker, like has it going on. And she trained in the Sonora Desert. And so she's like, girl, like, let's talk about this plant, right? And so every time that I work with it, it kind of reminds me of her and just the way that we're in community together. Its appearance is evergreen flowering shrub, and it has a lot of sprays, meaning that the stems, all the plant itself is really dense, compact green leaves, tiny yellow flowers, and it blooms in spring and has some fuzzy seeds, right? The interesting thing going into the queer spirit of it, right? So the plant itself is in the root system is in a ring, And the oldest that we know root system is 11,070 years, right? It dates all the way back to the Holocene period. And that if we think of it like, the fungus, right? How we always say like the mushroom is the fruit body, it's kind of the same thing. Like it's very similar to aspen in terms of there's a main root system and all the shrubs create this ring, basically clones of each other, right? That are in constant contact. The other thing that's really cool is that, how always in the kind of the Western idea of the survival of the fittest and competing for resources and like all that kind of pizzazz. So one, biologically, the shrub itself can last 2 years without water, right? It's so drought tolerant. But two, the way that it works with community is it actually extends down, like the root system is down, 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 and it gathers all the debris, which are usually other plants, other shrubs, other seeds in the small little, kind of sprouts of things, and it tucks them underneath the canopy. And it's shown that the soil that's underneath the canopy of the shrub is the most like full of vitamins and minerals and like outside of like in the periphery of the sands, right? Because it lives in the Sonora Desert. It lives in like all the really deserty, aridy places in the Southwest. And so they don't compete for the same water sources in the same way. If anything, it parents all the other plants around it so that way they are consistently nourished. So I'm going to stop there. I know that y'all have other points y'all maybe want to get into with cresote, but I'll get back into it because there's a great Pima story that I would love to share.
I just want you to talk about how it smells.
Ooh.
Please.
So cresote is known as whenever you kind of release the oils in it, it smells like rain in the desert. So literally crush it up and it's the first rain. And it's said that the potency of that smell can go all the way across like, from the desert into Tucson, right? That it has that type of aromatic fragrance and it literally smells like the first rains on the earth whenever it's fresh. Oh, the other thing is that it's genetic variations, right? So the Mojave Desert variation of cresote has 78 chromosomes. The Sonoran Desert has 52 chromosomes. The Chihuahuan Desert has 26. And that these variations are linked to it, that it's adaptation to regional rainfall patterns, right? So talking about a great plant for any type of adaptation scenarios. Also, whenever we feel that we're going through arid moments, whenever we need sustenance, whenever we need to tap those deep, deep, deep root systems that can hold us. The branches also orient towards the southeast, capturing the morning sun while minimizing exposure to the hotter afternoon sun, reducing evaporation. The leaf clusters provide self-shading, reducing overheating and water loss for any other plants and animals. Can I now share, would y'all like to hear a little Pima creation story around the cresote?
Yes, please.
Yay!
Can I just share something before we get too far away from what you shared and what came up? So when you talked about how I think you said it can go 2 years without water or something. Immediately what popped in my head was that song, I'm a survivor, I'm a survivor. Da, 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 da. And then also how queer it is. It's like a queer parent, the way that it's like, I'm going to protect all these plants, no matter who they are or what they are, and like hold them under my canopy. And, it's like a house mother.
I was appreciating, I want to share with our listeners if it's cool, like we all decided to get into this plant. What did you call it, Lynn? It was the plant pen pals. So we actually are sending, and I just want to, when I received the package from Lou, I was happy, like I took it up to the altar, and when I went to open it, the first thing was this aroma that like, oh, it just I was like hypnotized. I was like, whoa. It was so cool to experience. So I appreciate that was the way that the medicine, we met one another was through its aroma. And I really love, Lynn, thanks for raising that. And Lou, wow, thank you for just introducing on a deeper level this medicine. Can I share this, that Nick and I were both gifted this medicine in spray form from another dear friend of ours, Madre Jaguar. And that's what's interesting was that, here this medicine appeared again. And so it's just so magical how plants can how we can find one another and how plants can find us through one another.
Absolutely. And it goes back to, kind of this idea of the medicine arises when the need is there. And that the medicine is always kind of in our backyard, that the bioregions, what I was always taught is the illness, wherever the illness arises, the medicine is right next to it. But we have to be aware and observant enough and not just look at the form, but look at the spirit of the thing that's speaking, right? And it can be real easy to commodify, to purchase, to go get a crystal, to go do that, or to think that we always talk about this, that there's this special plant out there that's going to cure something, right? And I know that whenever we look at, other plants, that we're going to be talking about later on, because it's ordinary, we forget that it's special. And that's also what I think that, y'all are bringing up too, is just the magic in the ordinary, the magic in relationality and connection and seeing each other and what medicine that can, kind of bring up. So, okay, y'all get this. So this is coming from Pima elders, and they relate that the creator, the earth maker, rolled out the soil like a tortilla and shaped it into a small mound for the cresote bush. The bush housed a small insect that grew its own gum-like substance for a shelter. This substance, called lac, L-A-C, was gathered by the creator, the earth maker. And while they were singing and shaping the mountains, they spread this lac, right, over everything, and that's how the earth became hard. So I thought that was a really, kind of just a beautiful little sharing of the form, right? That this beautiful, bush housed this beautiful insect that then created a substance that materialized everything, that gave form, right?
Yeah, it's a beautiful creation myth.
Let me see. So I know that we're kind of going into, moving into transitioning to next plant, but can I just go over a couple of the medicinal and spiritual uses? So cresote produces certain herbal medicines that have an active ingredient against viral infections, and it's used as an anti-inflammatory, specifically around rheumatism and things that are going on in the immune system, where the immune system is attacking other cells. Cresote was noted as having deep antiseptic qualities and is one of the herbs mentioned in the pharmacopoeia of the United States in the middle of the 20th century. And for those who don't know, having an herb actually being mentioned in large pharmacopoeia means that it's actually does a thing, right? Because they are definitely not giving credit to nothing. It has been used everything from skin and acne prevention to gum irritation to gastrointestinal problems, respiratory ailments, tuberculosis. The Pima prepared a decoction of the lac, remember that substance from the insect that was housed, with the infusion of the leaves to treat the common cold. Throats were treated using a decoction of the leaves as a gargle. It's been seen as an effective decongestant, as well as steaming it and bringing the boiling steam, or the steam into the lungs and the nasal passages can open up asthma attacks when inhaled. Let's see. There's a whole bunch more poultices, decoctions, infusions with both the leaves and the lac have been treated for cuts, abrasions, boils. When applied dry and pulverized leaves, has a great antiseptic and astringent, capabilities. So there's that. And then, just kind of as a final share, I love the medicine, the spirit medicine around it. So cresote, a flower essence. It supports us in releasing what is unexpressed, held in a way which is usually at the root of self-imposed separation from others. It brings us a sense of being freed, often used by resolving the feeling that something is missing in life. the harmonizing qualities of cresote. It helps the cellular, at a cellular level, releasing what is unexpressed or what has been held in. It promotes a feeling of brightness and a sense of being freed, feeling totally connected to your inner source, emerging from a deeper, darker reality or a more unconscious state to a bright, energetic one. It helps with patterns of unbalances, which are around intense inner desolation, feeling totally alone or cut off, loneliness, sadness, wistful bitterness, ancient feelings of being forever alone. It's also about, those who enclose themselves in a magical world because of safety. It's a way of creating safety in the materiality so they can start to come out. So it's used a lot, like outside of kind of trauma experiences and cleansings, with those who are kind of on the spectrum and who have a lot of interior, like are living in their interiority and kind of are slowly wanting to be brought out into the world to share their medicine. It's used in limpias to cleanse the body in traditional cleansings. It's used as a smudge, so you can burn it as an incense. You can put it in baths. You can make oils out of it. But all of it, kind of speaks to this engagement of coming out of the self, really feeling freed and moving into a brighter world.
I mean, that's all like queer liberation right there. I love that.
Nick, you mentioned it earlier, but through all the different applications and uses you talked about, Lou, like it's just resilience, that not only how it grows, how it protects those around it, but like just how strong of a plant medicine it is, both spiritually and medicinally, like on that antimicrobial level. We always talk about like how things work herbally or medicinally often mirror how they work spiritually. When you just think like something's off or icky or bad, that fresh rain scent is just like a huge reset.
Absolutely. And, thinking of it as like that refresher, right? And also in terms of thriving in spite of oppressive systems.
Yes.
That's all I have to say about that. I mean, there's tons more that you can say, and like even pairing it with things like manzanita, other herbs, like even like, some things that the other participants are going to be talking about today. It's a great complement. And so it works in community and allyship versus competition, right?
I love the queerness of that, right? The idea that it works with, like, I feel that's also like a very queer medicine in that way. Like, it's like, let's be alongside one another. Let's figure out how we can expand and amplify one another. So, yeah, such a badass medicine, such a badass plant, right? And around everywhere, actually, right? Like, it really is quite, like, I was reminding myself by looking at a picture, like, it really is. Chaparral is around most of the, well, when I say that, Lou and I live in similar areas for the listeners, Thongva, Keech, Chumash, and Pavunga land. And Chaparral is actually around. Like, you can see it around in different places quite frequently. So,
well, and if you ever want to, because I just got an app that shows where you can wild harvest different plants. So I'm all about let's go wild harvest, some of our plants together and have some fun. That's all I'm saying.
yeah, that's happening.
I also want to bring back in the idea of this winter solstice energy and how, like, the winter, Christmas, solstice, Kwanzaa, all of those different spiritual and religious practices are times of coming together in community or in family. And often we queer people feel isolated or alone. So this could be a really beautiful medicine to sort of bring in healing to all those aspects of connection and community too.
That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. I mean, especially as we're right, like, yeah, on these holiday seasons.
So, Lou, would you like to bring in the practice that you have for us today with Ryosote?
Absolutely. So I would just love us to kind of close our eyes or sit in a meditative way and really bring up the sensory feeling of smelling that rain on the earth. And we're just going to, call that in. And part of calling that in, I want you to feel that revitalization, that freshness, that sense of, the negative ions kind of lifting and elevating and bringing in that light energy, and not light in terms of just sunlight, but freedom, opening that chest, the ways in which the first rains help us remember our connection to the earth, and just remembering that we have deep, deep, deep root systems. So we call on the spirit of Cresote, the spirit of the chaparral flower, this amazing elder who has been speaking on these lands of the Southwest since at least 11,070 years ago. And that all that magnificent wisdom of holding community throughout that expanse of time, that those same experiences and knowledge are given to us. And that with however this next rain chooses to fall, all of us, no matter where we are on the earth, that we are lifted by the spirit of chaparral, even if it's not there in our bioregion. Ashe.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Creosote.
Should we stay in the region? Does it feel good for me to go next? Does that feel
Yes,
good to y'all?
absolutely.
Thanks, Lou, for sharing that. I was with my bundle. I was like loving on my bundle. It's just so magical. Hi, y'all. Yeah, I knew this was going to happen, just so y'all know. Like, I'm already feeling tender around the plant that I've chosen to work with, or the plant that chose me actually earlier this year, and it's known as ruda in Spanish. And what feels good for me and what felt good in Lynn, I really love that. Just so y'all know, the four of us have been in communication outside of this space, kind of throwing tips and hints of how to explore and get curious with the plant. And Lynn threw out this gentle reminder of asking the plant how it would like to maybe show up in this way. And in doing so, it took me back to a story that I've shared with this group, but I feel is important to share also with our listeners. So earlier this year, and I want to just say that I've been really lucky to be in the same residence since 2007. So it's 17 years of being here. And in doing so and getting to know my neighbors in a very low and slow, mindful way, across the street lived a couple named Ruben and Emma. And they have a son named Danny. And one of the special things that I love about being in a neighborhood or living in the barrio is that it's always very common to see folks out in their yards tending to their gardens. And that was one of my most favorite things, was to look out the front window and to see Ruben and Emma working together. And to be honest, what that did was it activated memories for me of my grandparents, my great-grandparents, including time with my sister and my parents, because we all tended to gardens. So I've been tending in gardens since I was a little kid. I was curious in my grandparents' gardens and my great-grandfather's gardens. And so seeing Ruben and Emma was always very activating in a very beautiful, sweet way, right? Like, I think it's so sweet when folks can tend to gardens together. Well, earlier this year, Emma passed away from cancer, and her and Ruben had been together for over 40 years. And so in knowing that this had happened, I noticed that the garden had not been tended to, and it felt right to me to go over to Ruben and ask and say, I would really love if I could help to tend to your garden, and I'd like to honor you and your wife and Danny's mom in that way. And it was really special. He was very moved by it. I was very moved by it. I was speaking my Spanish and English, and he was speaking his Spanish and English, and we were having this very sweet moment. And we just had this consensual agreement, and I started to work in the garden. And that day, I'll never forget it. Like, literally, as I got on my knees to start to tend to the space, it was Rue. And for those of you that don't know Rue or Ruda, one of the first ways that medicine can greet you is through its very, very strong, potent, fragrant aroma. And some may say, like, whoo, it's almost kind of like so strong that it can really catch you. It's known, by the way, in some medicine spaces as like an herbal kick in the ass. And so this fragrant of Rue just like really took over my entire system. Like, I wasn't just smelling it, I was in it with the plant. And as I was clearing out and weeding, I felt this sense of, well, to be honest, I felt Emma. I felt the spirit of Emma there. And I felt her and her gratitude of like, thank you for coming and for tending to this garden. And so this plant, she had it everywhere. She had it all in little spaces in the front yard. So anywhere that I would go to, there was just the aroma and then, kind of clearing up around it. And I want to say that, I still tend to Ruben's garden. And, I have to share with you all that the magic behind this plant, I had no idea that it would also encourage Ruben to come out and start tending to his garden, to the garden again. He has shared with me that now he recognizes that tending to the garden is a way of honoring his wife, and that he has been tending to it. And now we do it together, and like we do that. And it's just, this plant to me literally has it's been so magical. And I haven't even shared with you all the magic of the plant. So the magic of rue is what I'd like to say, or how I've learned it, is that it can be very cleansing and protective. It's known as the medicine of grace and forgiveness. In Spanish, there's the word of ides, and ides means it's an arrogant and conceited ways of acting. Well, rue has a way of removing that kind of stuff, and it's very strong. It's really known as an herbal kick in the ass. It's actually known in the medicinal field as not being a gentle healer because it is that potent. And so I want to also share from this book that was gifted to me by Nick, the Curanderex Toolkit. I want to share just a couple of inserts, if I may, about the plant. Ruda is native to both North Africa and the Balkan Peninsula. It grows easily in many climates. It's very drought tolerant. It also, medicinal uses, it's a badass. It can help with stomach pain, inflammation, digestive issues caused by excessive anger, by the way. It supports digestion. It can be combined with other medicines, and then it actually does even more so other things. One thing I found really interesting and potent about it is that Ruda can actually be used to accelerate labor and induce abortion. And kind of interesting, because interesting in that way, it also can be mixed with chocolate and to help the womb relax and to release the placenta after birth. It can be used in a culinary way as well. There's a lot of warnings around it to be used with caution, meaning that it can cause, because it is such a strong herb, it's recommended in small doses. So for even the simplest earache, it says put a folded leaf on the outside of the ear. Don't let it go into the ear canal. Don't go around and start limpia somebody with a branch of ruda or yourself, because it is such strong, it can cause a rash. So there is this invite to be mindful, right? To me, that reads as consent, right? In a queer way, that ruda is I'm here to work with you, but let's have some agreements and some consent here and understand one another. And let's see. I think the medicinal stuff I thought was really cool, and the mindfulness of safe uses to me.
It's rue is a disciplined dom top.
Absolutely.
It's you want discipline? I'll give you discipline. Here we go.
Yeah. And I love it that in that way that it's known as an herbal kick in the ass when I think about it. Sometimes, right, we do need that, maybe there are times when arrogance or things come into play, or anger, right, or forgiveness. I think it makes me think of deep resentment, when you've held on to something for a really long time, and that it can come in and be all right, if you're truly ready to release that kind of stuff. And used in grief, I think that because it has such a connection to anger, that anger being one of the ingredients of grief, that I also feel. And let me just say, this plant in its natural state is gorgeous. It's green and blue leaves with yellow flowers. Gorge. And then as it dries, it becomes even more gorgeous into this woody, very gorgeous, light tan and brown, and its seeds are little pods. I believe I learned on the podcast Radicle Curiosity, by the way, that you can take a ruda seed and put it over charcoal, and you can actually do a cleansing, a removal of any negative spirits, right? That kind of, so this is truly such a plant. Its botanical name, Ruta graveolens, is its botanical name. So I'm really grateful. Ruben gifted me a plant, an actual plant of Rutha. So now it is existing in the backyard. And y'all, the Rutha has come with its unexpected surprise of it also came with 9 giant swallowtails. Apparently, Rutha is a plant that swallowtails are very attracted to. And I did not know. I thought, wow, this plant has like this white stuff on it. It was the camouflage of like looking like bird poop, but they were in fact caterpillars. And 9 of them, as I've tended to this plant. I have 2 cocoons in the back right now that are still hanging out, ready to take flight. So this plant has shown up in such a magical way in my life. And I feel that, we're like deeply dating at this point, and I feel super, super connected with it. And I'm, I'm open to hearing any and all things related or questions or things, or if anyone wants to sprinkle in their Rutha experience.
I wanted to jump in real fast because I recently learned, and this is why plant stuff never gets boring for me. In North Africa, they do rue in the coffee ceremonies where it's like roasting it right in front of you. And there's like rue leaves on like the very concentrated little coffee. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't, that smell. And there's oftentimes like frankincense involved in that process too. And so I wanted to share because that was my like most recent rue find. But my longtime favorite is that rue, marigold, and basil together are called the Three Sisters of Mercy. And I love like that, going back to community and that grouping and like special combinations.
Well, and I love that they all smell like, y'all, okay, I love y'all, but like for me, rue smells like diesel. Like it is not some fragrant, like she is, and I love her, and she is a best friend. And I laugh because, so as a side story, I had gotten a variety that's grown in Syria, right? It was called Syrian rue. And I was like, why does my whole damn apartment smell like diesel? I was like, is somebody, is there somebody like backed up to my window? Like, and then I was like, am I feeling lightheaded? Like, you know what I mean? Am I going to get carbon monoxide poisoning? Like, what's going on? And then I realized I had taken care of the plant so well that it was fully so. Yeah, so needless to say, I love her, but sometimes she gets a little bit too odoriferous. Let me just put it that way. So, I've been with this plant for a long time too, reversing, work, really being able to send back to sender. I'm rubber, you're glue kind of energy. It also works with folk who had that envidia on them. And by that, I mean jealousy or evil eye to the point where, I don't, kind of they're energetically looking at their feet. They don't even have the energy because they've been bullied so much to like be able to stand up straight because the moment that they do, they get beaten, energetically. So it's a way of like sending all that back, really breaking those patterns, but also encouraging the world can be actually cool if I'm not getting beaten, right? Like, so it encourages and strengthens and kind of helps to reposition. Like you're saying, Tanya Mark, it can be because it's photosynthesizing, meaning that the oils when like they're put on the skin can cause blisters in direct sunlight. But depending on how you use it, like I do use it in limpias, but I don't like rub it on the body in that way. I like put it in herbal concoctions and like sprinkle and like that versus like that's an herb that I like, have them use, directly in front of the sun, all that kind of stuff. You can also, as a side note, because I'm trying to work with it as a perfume, knowing my ass, right? I always go for the hard ones, but there's some stuff made now of essential oil that's taken out the photosynthesizing component of it, which is kind of cool. So that's all I had to say.
Yes, I love it.
There's a really cool queer nature aspect to rue among everything we're talking about. So the first flower on the top of the stem is 5 petals. All the other flowers are 4 petals. And so it doesn't have to fit this mold of like everyone being the same. And there's not a lot of plants that have that variety. So I just love seeing that when we were talking.
Yeah, and the green blue leaves with the yellow flowers. Oh, I was thinking about the green blue today. It's one of my favorite colors in the larger Crayola crayon box was green blue because it's just, and to have that in a plant is just gorgeous, right? So I also feel like, it has that very queerness of like my color is, very queer in that way. So the yellow flowers, just something to, yeah. Should y'all, my idea to work with Rue today was to do some breathing with it. And so if you're open to it, I just want to bring us into our body, into our breath, connecting to our breath. And really it's about inhaling the medicine of Rue, all the medicine that everyone sprinkled in today, inhaling it and then sharing it on the exhale with our systems. And I want to bring in some gratitude, right? So as we share a breath of gratitude for Rue and all of its medicine and magic that we've explored and been curious about today. And then bringing in another breath of gratitude for the resources that were accessed. I actually really learned about Rue through my godson, who's almost 10 years old. The plant app that I used for my homework, Picture This, was from Super D, an almost 10-year-old magical human. So I want to bring in some gratitude for the resources as well as the text of the Kuranderex toolkit, and really just honoring with gratitude the resources of Rue. And then bringing in a breath of gratitude for Rue as it has shown up in Ruben and Emma and Danny and in their family, and in the way that Rue has shown up in all of our lives and will continue to show up in the lives of others, and bringing in gratitude that way. And lastly, the 9 swallowtails that came in, this deep transformational energy that showed up in alongside this beautiful Rue plant and called for the tending of their transformation, and how Rue nourishes the caterpillar into the cocoon. Thank y'all.
Yeah, I was really just connecting in with that, the energy that you're talking about of how like strong it is and kind of aggressive seeming it can be. But sometimes that's what's needed for the transformation. And I'm thinking about like, you know, caterpillars and cocoons and butterflies, like they literally turn into liquid. Like that's some potent energy they need, and that energy of the Rue is probably supporting that, like that strength to like dissolve yourself and then to recreate yourself anew. And so, like Lou, as you were talking about, it smells like diesel. I'm like smelling the plant that Tanya Mark sent, and it's been a few days now, and it's mellowed out. But I'm like, yeah, I can smell a little bit of diesel, but I also smell, Lynn, when you said marigold, I smell a little bit of marigold. I smell a little bit of sweetgrass. It's kind of like all those things together. It's like cleansing and delicate and dry, but also like, there's some fuel in there to really get it going. So thank you.
Well, and kind of as a reminder too, is that we can be high fem, but that doesn't mean that we're passive. That like there's warriorship in no matter what our expression is. And in certain ways, that expression itself is being in our warriorship.
That's what I was thinking, like with the swallowtails, Tanya Mark, when you brought up, it made me think, besides how they're camouflaged like bird poop, is the smell of the Rue protective of them as like that mothering warrior, like stay away from my babies? Or if they're eating it, do they taste bitter? Or are they more poisonous in that way where like whatever they eat, they're less likely to be swallowed whole? And like not only how she shows up for us, but like just specifically in that swallowtail story, that's big, like stay off my babies.
Yeah, thank you for naming that. Yeah, and I was also thinking of the idea of like, something really resonated when this idea of it being a kick in the ass healing. It's like, I think we kind of reflect each other. I'm like that with folks, right? Like I'm that person that can kind of deliver that kick in the ass with love and compassion, right? But also like, how interesting, like when plants kind of find one another, that maybe what Rue has been teaching me behind the scenes is how to do that how to support people in that way, how to tend to people, in a protective way that allows them to go through their transformation as well. So yeah, thank you, Rue.
So the plant I picked is Osha. And to honor not only the queer spirit of the plant, but the queer spirit of my teacher and elder that really introduced me to Osha, the herbalist Anne Drucker, who is just amazing human, but not only works with Osha, was the first one in my herbal training to really sit my ass down and make me connect with the spirit of the plant in the way that I so love deep diving and going on more information, more, reading, how to make stuff out of it, experiencing it, when she was no, sit with the plant. And not just on a topical level or of yeah, there's a spiritual connection or, an afterthought, you're going to sit with it until it talks to you. And I just want to honor her as a lesbian and an adoptive mother. And when I had babies strapped to my back, that she let me do trade to take classes and get healing work from her. And so a lot of the information that I'm sharing directly comes from a queer elder of this plant that I picked for its queer spirit. So, and I'm trying not to cry now. But so Osha, scientific name Linguisticum porteri, and she has so many names. So I'm only going to name a couple of them. Most important that I'll be talking about today are her name Bear Root or Porter's Lauvage. In Espanol is Chuchupate, Empress of the Dark Forest, Colorado Cough Root, Wild Celery, Oshala. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And for right reason, that she's a powerhouse in both medicinal and spiritual realms. So she's native to the Rocky Mountains, high altitude. So Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, parts of Utah, northern parts of Mexico like Chihuahua and Sonora area. She likes moist, well-drained soils on the edge or at the beginning of wooded areas. I know her as being in relationship and taught me that she was lovers with aspen. And so she has to have the mycorrhizal network underneath, but she also grows around pine oak woodlands or spruce fir forests. I first experienced her in aspen groves above 10,000 foot. Part of that, she grows at lower elevations than that, but she looks so similar to water hemlock and poison hemlock. For baby herbalists that are starting to identify, there's much less likelihood of poison hemlock being up that altitude. Now I can spot it from far away, but Osha plant looks similar to, if you know what Queen Anne's lace or wild carrot look like, or if you know what poison hemlock looked like. It's a very thin stem, gorgeous kind of ferny leaves, and it comes up, and the type of flower is called umbelliferae, where it's almost like if you put an umbrella upside down, when it has all those little stems coming out of the one base stem, and there's teeny little white flowers on the top. So it's this gorgeous lacy flower, skinny, tall. Sometimes it can grow up to 6 feet tall. For me here, it's usually knee to hip height. And that it is a slow growing plant, and it is hard to cultivate. So the vast majority of Osha is wildcrafted. And just like animals can be at risk or endangered, so can plants. And while there's lots of her where I live, she's on the at-risk list. So while we're talking about this, the ethical harvesting and knowing what you're doing is crucial to not only the spirit of the plant, but the population of the plants and the environment where it's coming from. So her nickname, Bear Medicine, comes from the Navajo teaching that humans learn to use this plant by watching bears use it. And so when bears hibernate, it's not like they're in a coma. Like sometimes they get up and move around, but when you think of having to sleep and it's cold, everything shuts down. When you're not moving a lot, like respiratory system slows down, digestive system slows down, everything's colder. And we think like mucusy. And so when bears wake up, they're stuffed up, they're constipated, like nothing's warm or moving. And the first thing they do is go out and dig up this heating root. When it's called like wild celery, the herbalist Michael Moore described the scent and taste as like celery from hell. It's like dirty and that celery smell and spicy. And they eat this like heating medicinal root, and like all the snot comes out and they poop and then they get going. But there's also been findings over and over again of like a bear that died will be found and have like a bullet hole with osha root in the hole. Like they medicate themselves with it. And so while it is like a seasonal thing of they use it when coming out of hibernation, it is also year round as needed. And so they don't eat it as a food source year round. It's like very specific for something that's going on, which like just still gives me goosebumps. Like I've been working with the plant over 20 years and it still is like, do I know anybody that works at a zoo? Can I bring the bears some osha root? I mean, like, but in the same way that when we're talking about ethical harvesting, when bears dig it up, they do not take the whole plant. And so I was taught that when we go to harvest osha, not only seeing how many are there, so you're not taking the whole stand, you're taking enough that like you don't notice a difference. And the root is so strong that you can use the same one over and over and over again, like in tea, boil it over and over and over again until you don't taste or smell it anymore. Like osha root stored properly, like in dry, out of the sun container, will still be as potent like 50 years. And that you're supposed to dig with your hands. When you go down and dig with a metal shovel, or you take the whole root, you're killing the plant. It's gone, it's not coming back. But it has like one main root and kind of like hairy parts off to the side. When you dig and with permission, and I always tell people when I'm like, if you ask permission, if you're always getting a yes from the plant, you're not listening, because you shouldn't always be getting a yes. When you're digging, that you kind of get to like a node in the plant and you rock it back and forth until the part that wants to come with you does. And the rest of the root, even though it's slow going, isn't taken. And it might take up to 6 years, but it will continue to grow. And because it's a slow growing plant and very hard to cultivate, that is like a very important thing to do. The idea of the full medicine won't be there if you don't ask it to come with you and honor the spirit. And I was also taught when we do that, we leave salmon skin and honey or something that a bear would like. So we're honoring the spirit of the plant and we're honoring the connection that it has to the animal. And I'm like, oh, there's so much. So, and you all can jump in, but like on the folk uses or the medicinal uses of the plant. So it's nicknamed Colorado cough root. It's mostly known in Western herbal circles, like just on the surface, is respiratory. Like anything you have, like deep lungs, if, you know, cough stuff, that sore throat, bronchitis, cough, common cold, like influenza, pneumonia, anything like here. But it's a super potent antiviral and antibacterial agent. It has that heating property. So not only bronchial infections and sore throats, but it's so heating when you eat it, you sweat. And so it can be used internally. And one of the spiritual uses is externally, like in a sweat lodge or in a sweat, whether you are taking it in or it's being like steamed or burned over the coals or as an incense or added to smoke blends. To boost the body's immune system, it also has like a numbing effect on sore throats or topical. So sometimes it's used in salves topical for that antibacterial and also that slight warming and numbing effect. It has like any kind of gastrointestinal discomfort or increased appetite, which directly ties into like bears, where it's almost like their appetizer before going out and starting to forage when things are coming back up. I talked about like being used on cuts and scrapes because antibacterial. One of the things here that's interesting is it's used as a chew for rock climbers coming in from lower altitudes. So it is a preventative for altitude sickness. And actually just like ripped up either pieces, fresh or dried, usually dried, because unless someone's used to it, fresh can be similar to rue and people can have a reaction to it. So it's like, oh, usually dried, but like little shredded up pieces, just like tobacco chew, and that you're chewing and swallowing the juices while you're at a higher altitude. So it would be this bioregion's equivalent to like chewing cocoa leaves. Like you're doing something, that you require more oxygen while you're being physical. And I've also heard as like when we talk about like field medic stuff, where it's better to be over-prepared than under-prepared, but sometimes if someone's hurt or you're in a pinch, that OSHA is used as if someone doesn't have an EpiPen, if they don't have Benadryl, if they're having like an emergent histamine reaction, it's like you get as much OSHA into them as you can. Like if you have the tincture on you, we're not doing a dropper full, you're doing like a shot while we're calling 911, or as much of the root as you can get in. So while I wouldn't plan on that being a replacement for an EpiPen, that's something that like if you're up in the forest and someone's having a reaction and nobody has like a first aid kit, that's how powerful she is, both on like the histamine, but also getting more oxygen in the system for airway. The reason I chose it before, aside from like cool queer aspects of like in community and how she works and how I learned about her, for Solstice is that it's a root. The strongest part of the medicine we are harvesting in the winter, when she is putting all of her energy into growing leaves and growing flowers and making seeds. You can use the root. It's not the most potent or the kindest time of year to harvest it for the plant. Like when all the seeds have dropped and it has died away, it is after the first 2 or 3 hard freezes that it's dug and harvested, because then all of the volatile oils, the starches, the sugars, everything in the plant goes into the root to preserve the plant for the winter. And this is the time of year that we tend to use her the most, when it is increase in respiratory symptoms, when stuff gets colder. And so while she doesn't necessarily have like holiday connections to Solstice, like I always am like, oh, after the first couple hard freezes, but before the ground is totally frozen or you can't access her because it's like so much snow, I'm always thinking about like rose hips and Osho, like what are the roots that are harvested now? And so that always seems like, around this time of year is the first time my house smells like elderberry syrup or it smells like Osho. There is like a pot that's consistently going and this aroma in the house that like the kids are always like, ooh. But someday they'll smell that and be like, oh, it's like home. Spiritual uses. So aside from medicinally, she's used ritually and symbolically and in many different indigenous native tribes in America, even outside of where she's grown. Commonly associated with good luck and protection. Elders are often gifted a big Osha root as a gift, sometimes for use as medicine, but a lot of times just for the spirit of the plant in and of itself. There's connections to like love and fidelity. And I love that like being taught of like her and Aspen being lovers and that they exchange like care for each other. I love that like as humans, we exchange that as like a symbol of love and fidelity too. It can be like a good cleansing herb prior to ceremonies and rituals. My one caveat to that is because she isn't super abundant, unless you are in that tradition, I would honor her spirit and not be using her for cleansing. That And I'll get into like when it's like, oh, the practice that I'm using with her is like how to connect with the spirit without having to have the root. And I think when you truly know it's harvested ethically, there are ways to work with her safely that are not depleting the population. But we only work with her when she would only be the one that works. When there's so many other plants that can heal and work for the same kind of conditions, it is the knowing the spirit of the plant enough, not only asking permission, is like, is this the right plant for this time? That you can still be in like spiritual communion and honor her without having to like have her in person. Carried as like a good luck talisman that it's not uncommon, like in a bag, or like certain kinds of roots when they're fed with like oil or smoke blends, that it's almost its own entity, even though like while it's not living and connected to the earth, it still retains that spirit. And so I know people that like their Osha has a name, like they're always gonna care for it as like a living being. So before I jump into like my solstice practice with Osha, does anyone have any questions?
I don't have a question now that I want to. Oh my God. Like, I'm just like, oh, so much around this beautiful, magical plant. But one of the queer aspects that kind of shined when you were dropping all the medicine and magic, Lynn, was this idea of a bear coming out and the queerness of coming out, and how sometimes in our coming out process as queer people, we have these different layers of coming out, and how sometimes part of that tending may be that we need to cleanse our system, sweat out the shit of the shadowy aspects of, or the harming aspects or whatever aspects we need to kind of remove that no longer serve. And then there's this idea of, coming out again, like, so that really stood out to me in that way, that like, even in working with it on a spiritual level as a queer person, how incredible it would be to call in and cultivate that connection with Osha is like, as we evolve as queer people, period, like, there's just this, wow, that really like really, really stood out to me in that way. So, oh my gosh, what a rich, beautiful, incredible plant.
Thank you. I love that. And what came to mind when you were sharing is almost that unlearning. I'm thinking like how the bear is holding on to stuff that's no longer serving it and kind of has to purge, where it's like, oh, that's not true, or that's not me, like that shedding part.
I mean, for me, again, bear medicine, right? But also thinking of it in queer gay culture. And, just how, it's gotten a lot better in nowadays, but like growing in the early 90s, 2000s, even now, right? But like this idea of what's acceptable, like, and what's desirable body form and what's medicinal, what does it look like to like come out as a bigger bodied guy? Like that, OSHA has been a big ally for me and all that. And also like thinking of bear medicine and its protectiveness, again, in the ways that it holds community, it holds itself. And once you get a bear going, it's gonna keep going after you. So in all ways. But yeah, I love OSHA. Oh, and one thing that I was taught just as an energetic, even in some Afro-Caribbean traditions that are, have kind of, because of diaspora, like settled in, right, Colorado, New Mexico, like areas where this grows, is that sometimes it's used as a replacement for other herbs that we couldn't, find elsewhere. And so it's such a powerful herb in that way. It connects to that, kind of that all mother, all father, like, kind of vibe. And one last thing is in curanderismo and kind of the danza azteca, the creative force is called homeoteo, which is a both gendered creation, kind of omnipotent being. And so there's also connection with Osharu, in that kind of both and, creator kind of form.
I just love that like the person I learned about her from, it's like Audre Lorde posters on the wall, like the most womanist, like mixed match mugs and like savior jars, and there's always like a pot of tea on, and like learning about it in that like safe queer home. But so my practice, kind of like adjacent or with candle magic, is the idea for, instead of a New Year's resolution, something that's like, oh, I need to punish myself or discipline myself or to get where I want to go, it has to be hard and I'm going to stick to it, is the, what do I want to bring in and what plant helps you bring that in? Whether that is like a health thing or the spirit of the plant, and then working with that plant all year. And picking OSHA, where I'm just like, it's always so important for me to revisit stuff that even if I think I know everything by a plant, even looking at old notes that I took myself, let alone things from other people that I've never heard before, it is always remembering again. And Nick, like you said, beginning again, and like looking at it through a different lens at like a different age or at a different place that you're at. And the idea of having a candle, and that when you're sitting with the spirit of the plant, like lighting that throughout the year, like picking your plant to work with and to learn about on all the levels. And so that was that I wanted to share, where I was like, oh, I think this year I'm gonna stick with OSHA all year. Not that I won't use other ones, but like on a spiritual level, to really like sit my butt down and like, what does it mean to hold space and care for community without depleting myself? And that is a big part of her medicine, is like, we need to not over harvest or deplete her, but like how she feeds into the mycorrhiza and the aspen groves. And so that, and I'll write up a little thing, like a how-to, but I'm going to do a beeswax candle, and I have some dried leaves of OSHA, and you know how you can like melt beeswax and then paint the dried plants onto it so it's very beautiful, and then have my at least once a month where I like sit with her and burn the candle together, and there's that honey and beeswax connection to bear. And even if I don't need to taste or imbibe in her root, I can still be with her spirit and medicine.
So gorge. There's something that I think the three of us has mentioned that I think is an important medicine that I just want to name, that we all talk about a reciprocal connection with the plant, and that how it's about like working with the plant, whether it's spiritually or imbibing, and showing gratitude, right? So that medicine to me has been showing up thus far. And, so thank you all for each mentioning how important it is, that full cycle.
Wouldn't I, like, if you're coming as a visitor, wouldn't I take the time to like welcome you in my house and sit down with you and have a moment, right? Like, so I think that the, part of what's beautiful in these kind of conversations too is, how do we treat each other? How do we see each other? If we can't see each other, we're not going to see it in the plants. We're not. We're not going to see it in the ways that we treat the earth. We're not going to see it in any, like, there, right? Like, what does connection really look like? So when we sit with a plant or sit with a thing, we're sitting with the consciousness of that. And that's also how, like, for me, right, knowing Lynn and being with her spirit, I can look at a thing and be like, oh my God, that reminds me of Lynn. Like, I want to get that for her, right? It's the same thing, right? Like, that's what it means to be sitting with a spirit. Like, it's that communication, even when you're not physically talking with them. They're on your spirit. They're saying a thing to you, right? So, anyway.
I don't want to go too over, but Lou, you just reminded me that not only offering bear stuff and being in gratitude, that when you're in OSHA Grove, it is inappropriate to burn the root as incense or in a smoke blend there. You do that where she's not growing.
Yeah. It'd be like, let me eat like fish in front of all the fishes. You know what I mean? Like taking some Church's fried chicken in the middle of a chicken farm. Like, that's not fine.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, OSHA. So we're going to move on to my plant, which is the last one for our conversation today. And I chose rosemary. So I'm going to pull up my notes here on rosemary. I'm liking the personal stories that you all are sharing about your connection with the herbs. So I'm going to share a little bit of that before I go into the history and the science and all that stuff. So I think rosemary is one of the first herbs that I had a connection with as a child. When I was younger, I used to plant flowers in a vegetable garden with my mom when I was a kid every summer. And one year she was like, let's get some rosemary. And we planted it. And so, I was always the one who usually would go and water the garden and stuff like that. And we got this rosemary plant and we planted it in the ground. And I grew up in the suburbs of LA and Southern California. So rosemary loves that weather. It's dry, it's hot. And that rosemary plant got so big, we had to cut it back. But and rosemary was something that my mom used to cook a lot. She would cook it with chicken and lamb, and, people roast potatoes with rosemary all the time and all sorts of other things. And it's a really popular and great culinary herb. And then when I moved up to San Francisco and I started having space where I could have plants again, I got some rosemary from a local grocery store and just put it out there, and it got really big. And then I moved somewhere where I could plant it in the ground and it got super big, and it lasted. It's very hardy and you don't have to do so much to it. You can just let it go, and it doesn't need a lot of care or attention for the most part. So, but I also learned a lot about rosemary doing my research on it. So rosemary, the Latin name is Salvia rosmarinus. So it's part of the salvia family, which is like mint and sage and basil. And I didn't know that, but it also kind of makes sense. And some of its other names are rose of the sea or dew of the sea, which I thought was really interesting. I'll share a little bit more about that later. Southern wood is another name. And then old man. And I thought, oh, I wonder if the old man name is because it lasts so long and it's hardy and it just kind of if you see an old rosemary bush, it just kind of looks like an weathered old man in a way, at its stem. But its original native region is the Mediterranean, which makes sense because it's dry and arid. So like Europe and North Africa and Turkey and all those places. But I'm sure you see it all over. I mean, especially in California, I see it all over all the time. People use it for decorating their yards. There's different kinds. There's crawling rosemary that people use for ground cover. And then there's more bushy, taller kinds of rosemary plants. But when I first became kind of a armchair herbalist, I learned that rosemary was really good for the head and the scalp and things that have to do with the head and the scalp. And Lynn, maybe you could chime in at some point and say why that is. But it seems that the constituents of it are really good at circulation in the head and the scalp area. So it's used in a lot of hair care products for dandruff and hair growth and that kind of thing, and protecting the scalp. It's also used to make tea to relieve headaches, colics, colds, and depression. It has an antibacterial and antimicrobial properties, and it was traditionally used in European herbal remedies for eczema, wounds, poor appetite, and asthma. And one thing I read, which was really interesting, is that the longer and more intense a drought that the rosemary is in, is the stronger the smell will be. So I don't know if that has something to do with the stressing of the plant or like not watering it down so much or that kind of thing. So yeah,
it's
that
like
was
wines. You know how they don't want them so dry that they die. On like super wet years, it's not as flavorful. It's more concentrated, the oils.
Yeah. I mean, they also say that about grapes and for wine, like the wine grapes like bad soil.
Yeah.
Just leave them alone. They get hot and dry and that kind of thing. As far as some of the history of it, it was really interesting. They first mentioned rosemary on cuneiform tablets as far back as 5000 BCE. And let's see. So they believe that it sort of came to England most likely through the Roman invasion in 43 CE. And then, England uses a lot of rosemary and cooking. And then they started having it grown, that it was ordered to be grown in different places in Europe, particularly in France and England, to be grown in monastic gardens and farms. There starts to be this interesting connection to like spirituality, not just culinarily, but spirituality and that kind of thing. It was also planted in the Old Palace Garden of Westminster, and it was also found in Old English herbal texts. And then it eventually came to the Americas, probably around the 17th century, and then eventually spread to South America. So one of the reasons I picked rosemary is because I think about it at the solstice time. It's kind of it's not in the conifer family, like pine trees or anything like that, but it has a similar look and similar kind of smell. But I did find some more information that it was commonly used along with holly and ivy at Christmas time for decorations and that kind of thing inside the house. And then the other thing that I knew a lot about or had heard a lot about rosemary, both from a physical sort of constituent, is around memory, that it's, again, it's good for circulation in the head and the brain. And they talk about using it for studying and memory for tests and exams and that kind of thing, but also symbolically for remembrance. So there's a lot of connections that I found to remembering the dead. And they used it around funerals. They would often bury people with rosemary. There was even an example or evidence of it being buried in the tombs of pharaohs in Egypt for memory, as well as with the Romans and the Greeks. But then also I was thinking about what you were saying, Lynn, about Osha for commitment in a relationship. You talked about Osha, that they also talked about rosemary being used at weddings and hand fastings as a way to sort of like remember that you are making this commitment and being dedicated to your partner. So then what I started to think was, this is also a really interesting herb if it's associations to death and ancestors and remembering the dead and that kind of thing. And solstice, because solstice is basically the end of Samhain, and Samhain is the pagan Sabbath of the dead, remembering the dead, our ancestors and that kind of thing. And so it just added more layers to like bringing in rosemary as sort of like, we have remembered our dead. And now we're moving into this time of, the days getting longer, but we still remember our dead, even though we're moving on away from this holiday. So going back to the name, the rose of the sea or dew of the sea, apparently in Latin, the Latin word for rosemary means dew of the sea. And because there were some associations with Venus and Aphrodite related to that. And then later became linked to the Virgin Mary because of the really pale lavender blue blossoms that rosemary can often have as well. I also saw a few references to rosemary being used as a substitute for frankincense, which makes sense because especially rosemary was growing where frankincense doesn't grow. And I also like that going back to the sustainability aspect that you were talking about, Lynn, as, frankincense comes from trees and those things grow a lot slower, whereas rosemary grows very quickly and very abundantly. And so it's a good substitute for cleansing. So again, it has these physical properties of cleansing and disinfectant, but then there's also rosemary used for these magical spiritual properties, smudging, both the incense and also in my own personal practice, rosemary is often used for asperging. So doing saltwater asperging a room, asperging a person, cleansing in that way, the energetic space in that way. The last couple things I'll share, which were really interesting, is that rosemary was often planted in gardens to attract elves or the fae, and to also repel thieves or burglary from the home. So it was sort of seen as a protective plant for the home to protect it, not just from energies or disease, but also from, people who might want to come around and take from you. And there was also a few references that planting rosemary in the garden was a symbol of strength of the woman in the household, which I also thought was really interesting, kind of a queer spin of like, this is the woman or the feminine energy in the household is like staking their claim. And, there are even some descriptions about like the woman wearing the pants or something like that. But, so it was interesting that they're like, this is a symbol of the woman sort of like saying, this is my space, and the feminine energy has a presence here in this household. So I really liked those kinds of queer connections. And also it's kind of witchy, it's interesting because there are references to witches using rosemary for all these things, but then also people using rosemary to repel witches, so it probably just depends on who's telling the story and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's my little report on rosemary. Just leave some space for anything else people want to share or bring in.
I just wanted to piggyback, Nick, on what you were talking about, like the woman wearing the pants like rosemary. So definitely in South Balkan, primarily in like Italian type strega traditions, it is both the woman and like extended anyone who doesn't seem to have the power. And so that tends to be like anyone femme presenting in those areas where, okay, someone is technically the person who makes the decisions in the house versus who's running things behind the curtain. And rosemary is used a lot in both that protection and I need this to happen for my own protection, while at the same time being used for beautifying. Which I love that like duality of like, oh, it looks pretty and soft, but like I'm getting stuff done that I need to get done.
No, I mean, exactly, Lynn. I mean, rosemary is one of my big allies, even though I can't grow it. It's one of the herbs that she does not grow for me. I always kill her. I always overwater or underwater or over sun or under sun. She just does not do a thing, even though I can grow pretty much everything else. Don't even ask me. But so, I mean, very similar. I've engaged it folklore-wise as a trans herb. And especially there's a tradition out in Naples there's a Black Madonna that is brought out, I believe, during February, who's associated with a trans community. And she's washed as part of that with rosemary as a way of consecrating her for this next year. She, like rosemary and kind of the curanderismo traditions, is used in a number of different ways, from like reconciliation work, peace work, exorcism work, like you're talking about that memory, kind of thing. I use it incense or fumigation wise, like instead of white sage, I love rosemary as a fumigatory. And basically hotbox it before I do any spiritual work, like just as a way of settling the spirits. And then, right, you're remembered, you're like at peace, you're right. Again, fidelity, but also can be used to like kind of stop up somebody's nature in terms of you can't get it up if you're not with me. And then the last one, just perfumery wise, there's this amazing scent that I've been working in my head of like the smell of the sea, that like salty sea smell with a little undertone of rosemary underneath. Do y'all know who the Madonna is? The Stella Maris, the Madonna of the ocean. She's connected with rosemary that grows on the very tall, tall cliffs as the sea fog grows in, like in the morning dew. That's when you collect that to like honor, Stella Maris. So, anywho, I can go on, but I love rosemary. And also with
Yeah. I do too. As a witch, I feel like Rosemary and I are like, we're very like, we're just hang out on the daily. That's the truth. And like the way in which we work together, it varies, but it really is a part of like my daily ritual in some way. I always have an Oya on the stove. For those of you that don't know what an Oya is, it could be a pot or a pan of water. Water, and I throw fresh and or dried herbs that are, local. Sometimes an orange peel if I've eaten an orange, like just working with that. And no matter what, rosemary is always part of that Oya. It makes me think of, I guess I hadn't thought about it until y'all named it, because about the fidelity medicine and how in queerness, that might be something that could be really used in a very tender way, right? Because a lot of times in queer connections, we're navigating what our sense of agreements and, monogamy, not monogamy, whatever that might be. And so I kind of connected that today, where it was like, ooh, that would be an interesting, should someone be talking about working that out, rosemary might be a great medicine for them to cultivate connection with. So thanks for naming all of these, Nick. I love Nick. I totally nerded out on all the history of rosemary because I know it from such a different lens. It was really refreshing to get like this historical point of view and also to honor it in that way, in the way that it has been around for a long time and has deep uses.
Yeah. One last thing I'll share on a personal level and coming back to, Lou's practice of connecting with the spirit of the plant is that when I did my hypnotherapy training, we were encouraged to connect with the guide. And so the guide that came in was the spirit of rosemary. And, it makes sense because in hypnotherapy, working with clients, you're trying to have them connect to their memory, right? So rosemary really brings that in of that work. So for my practice, I wanted to do a song or a chant, but I couldn't find any songs or chants about rosemary. Everything that came up was like pop songs or folk songs that were more about women named Rosemary, that maybe they were alluding to the plant as well. But what I did find instead was a poem. And it's a poem from this very young British poet named Henry Kirke White, who actually died when he was 21 years old. But I think he was in England in like the 1800s at some point. So he wrote a poem called An Ode to Rosemary, and a lot of it has to do with these connections to remembering and honoring the dead. So I wanted to read that poem for the practice to honor rosemary. Sweet scented flower, who art wont to bloom on January's front severe, and o'er the wintry desert drear to waft thy waste perfume. Come, thou shalt my nosegay now, and I will bind thee round my brow. And as I twine the mournful wreath, I'll weave a melancholy song, and sweet the strain shall be, and long, the melody of death. Come, funeral flower, who lovest to dwell with the pale corpse in lonely tomb, and throw across the desert gloom a sweet decaying smell. Come, press my lips and lie with me beneath the lowly alder tree, and we will sleep a pleasant sleep, and not a care shall dare intrude to break the marble solitude so peaceful and so deep. And hark, the wind god, as he flies, moans hollow in the forest trees, and sailing on the gusty breeze, mysterious music dies. Sweet flower, that requiem wild is mine, it warns me to the lonely shrine, the cold turf altar of the dead. My grave shall be in you lone spot, where as I lie by all forgot, a dying fragrance thou wilt over my ashes shed. So thank you to Henry Kirke White for that poem, and thank you to Rosemary for all your magic and medicine. So just taking a moment to thank all of our plants and allies, to Creosote, aka Chaparral, to Rue, aka Ruda, and to Osha, and to Rosemary. We thank you all. So before we wrap up, we wanted to just share with the listeners a little bit more information about where you could find more research on these plants and any other plants that you want to work with. So I just want to hand it over to Lou and Lynn if you have any resources that you want to share with listeners that are some of your favorites.
Lynn, do you want to go first?
We look up a lot of stuff on JSTOR, any of like the scholarly article sites. Is it Bastyr University? They have great resources. American Herbalist Guild. For where all four of us are from, like Southwest West regions, Michael Moore, the herbalist, has amazing books specific to where each of us are. And Lou, jump in. I was like, there's so many good things.
No,
I feel like I'm gonna leave stuff out.
There's a couple, like it for people who want to do more metaphysical investigation of some of these herbs, and especially in the pagan communities, like the Encyclopedia of Herb Magic by Cunningham is always a great place to start. In rootwork traditions and traditions of the South, things like the hoodoo herb and root magic text by Ironwood is good. There's a couple of curanderismo ones. Healing with herbs and roots by Elio Torres is great. And then let me see. I'm looking at yeah, that's it for the moment. I mean, there's so much more, but I know that we'll have a list at the end, with the episode too.
Yeah, yeah.
I would like to share too, if it's cool. On IG, check out Hood Herbalism. They're amazing. They do beautiful, beautiful work, and they have workshops and offerings. I also want to name checking out the invite to check out local apothecaries. We have one here in Long Beach named Green Wisdom that is run by Julie. And, that's a wealth of knowledge from herbalists and botanists and witches and folks in that way. So maybe, seeking out an apothecary. And there was one more. And Botanica. I want to mention the Medicine of a Botanica. Those are places where you can also visit, be mindful of energy and, in that way. But those are also locations of folks that also work with plants and herbs in very magical ways. And if you're lucky, you can find a local botanica with someone who is willing to, share their knowledge and wisdom in a way that feels aligned to you. So.
Yeah, I want to second the botanica and the apothecary because so many people are turning to, the internet to order their plants and herbs, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but there's also a lot of wisdom and care going into these local stores. And, here in San Francisco, there was a very popular apothecary store that was run by queer folks for a long time and ended up closing because they just couldn't make it financially. And as far as resources, I'll also throw in the two people I like who are very accessible was Rosemary Gladstar. It's very easy read, easy to understand. And then Susan Weed does a really good job of writing and talking about both the sciencey medical stuff and also the kind of witchy stuff. So check out them as well. So thank you to all of the teachers who have held the lineages of plant spirit medicine, the witches, the medicine people around the world who have carried this forward so we can continue to benefit from their work and their labor. And any other bits of gratitude people want to sprinkle in.
Thank you. This was great. I had so much fun and just being in even virtual space with you all.
Amazing, and go us, and amazing blessings for this solstice season, and may we all flourish in however this rolls.
Yeah, and a shout out to our community of listeners. Thank you so much for, being here, listening, participating. We hope that whatever medicine and magic was supposed to land with you, it lands in a very caring, nurturing way.
Yeah, and we'll have links to all the resources in the show notes, as well as we're going to create a single document with all the different practices that all four of us shared with you today. So you can continue to bring that into your practice, into your community, and into the new year. So thank you all for being here. Oh my gosh.
There will be links to find each one of us too, I believe. So if you want to find and be curious about us as well. So yahoo!
Resources that we shared today can be found in our show notes and at thequeerspirit.com.
You're invited to follow our show on Apple Podcasts or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform.
Thanks for listening.
Until next time, much love and blessings. Aho.